Shabbat Shalom, everybody. So guess what? I have news for you. 2020 is over. Baruch Hashem. You know, I feel like we should add a service of Hallel today, just because what a year. I do want to spend a moment doing one of these retrospectives, looking back. We've had plenty of 2020, no need to look backward, only forward now. Just to think about the fact that we have a vaccine on the way. God willing, there'll be sanity returning to Washington. All good things coming our way. Please God. Of course, we also have to acknowledge that we're still not out of the woods, of course. We still have a pandemic raging all around us. We still have so many reasons for uncertainty in our lives. But the message I want to give us all today is keep the faith. Keep the faith. That's actually a very hard concept for a lot of Jewish people, to keep the faith. Perhaps it's because we've been through so many centuries of persecution and suffering and Cossacks and whatnot. Most of us Jewish people tend to have a iffy relationship with the concept of keeping the faith. Many of us adopt an I'll believe it when I see it attitude. But what I want to say today is that lack of trusting can be very difficult, a difficult way to lead our lives. And what I want to teach today is actually the concept of faith in Judaism. You know, faith is a word you hear a lot, particularly in Christianity. What does faith mean for us Jews? That's what I want to talk about. So the character of Jacob, who we've been reading a lot about in the end of the book of Genesis, is a character who has a lot of trouble also with the idea of faith. You can say that he also had a I'll believe it when I see it attitude through most of his life, didn't he? A couple of weeks ago, I talked about the famous dream of Sulam Yaakov, the Jacob's ladder, where he dreams that there's this ladder going to heaven and God is speaking to him from the top, promising him that he will keep him safe and bring him home, then his descendants will be a blessing. And when Jacob awakens from the dream, his reaction is essentially, well, I'll believe it when I see it. So here we are many, many years later. His family has arrived in Mitzrayim. They've been saved by Joseph. So the question in our minds is, has he learned after all of these years to truly have faith? Is that something that he excels at? And the answer I would posit is yes and no. It's because he's a man, Jacob is a complicated character. He is still filled with a lot of bitterness about all of his travails in his life. There's no question about it. But at the same time, he's not just Jacob, he's also Yisrael. He also is this man of God now. He has this extraordinary gift of prophecy, and he is able to see things as Yisrael that ordinary human beings can't say. In fact, in the Parsha, he literally gathers his children around him and he says, Vagida lachem et asher yikra etchem ba'achari tayamim. I will now tell you what will happen at the end of days. Jacob is about to share with his offspring and with all generations what's going to happen through the rest of history and what it's all going to come to at the end of all of history. So, no, what does he say? Well, actually, he doesn't say anything. We don't know. There's nothing that he particularly says. He simply goes on and starts to bless his sons. So what happened to his promise that he was going to tell us what's going to happen at the end of days? Rashi comments and says, well, he was about to tell them what was going to happen at the end of days, but suddenly at that moment, God withdrew the Shekhinah from him. God withdrew God's presence and God's gift of prophecy from him. So he wasn't able to tell them what was going to happen at the end of days. And my reaction to reading that Rashi is, Gewalt. I mean, come on, God, come on, Torah. Why can't Jacob just tell us what's going to happen at the end of days? What gives? And of course, through this brilliant teaching of Rashi, in a sense, we're being shown these two sides of Jacob and Israel. As Yisrael, he does have the capacity to see what's going to happen and to really know for sure what's going to be. And as Jacob, he sees this happening for himself and he has this thought, oh, good. Now I can just tell my kids and all future generations of my descendants, meaning you and me, how it's all going to work out in the end. But then suddenly, according to Rashi, God doesn't let him. And instead, he just blesses his kids. So what's the lesson here? The lesson is, even more important than the gift of prophecy, even more important than the gift of being able to see what's going to happen, is the gift of emunah, of having faith. You know, when I was just starting kindergarten, my mom drove me to school for the first couple of days, but you know, she had things to do, so she signed me up to take the bus home every day. And she explained to me that when the time would come after the day when I went to school, that I should take the fourth bus in the lineup of the buses. And she said, you know how to count. So you count 1, 2, 3, 4. The fourth bus is the one you take. Now, the morning came of the day I was going to take the bus, and I was a total wreck. I was a profoundly anxious child, particularly separation anxiety. And I just couldn't handle this at all. So she told me that more. She reminded me, take the fourth bus home. And I looked at her and I said, which bus? And she said, the fourth bus. 1, 2, 3, 4. You take the fourth bus. And I looked at her and I said, which bus? And she said, the fourth bus. Which bus? And I kept following the poor woman around all morning saying, which bus? Which bus? Until finally she was at her wit's end. And I remember very clearly, she took out 4 hair curlers and went 1, 2, 3, 4. You see the fourth one? That's the fourth bus. That's the one you get on. And then I looked at her and I said, which bus? So at that moment, my mom, being a good mom, took a deep breath, and she realized that her anxious child, what he really needed was not the number 4, but was just relentless reassurance that it was going to be okay. I guess she understood that deep down, I wasn't just asking which number bus it was. I was asking a very philosophical question for a 5-year-old. I was asking, how can I absolutely know it's going to be number 4? I mean, maybe somebody's going to get confused and then I won't get home. So she reassured me, and guess what? That day came, I got on 1, 2, 3, 4, and I got home. Happy ending for that story. But I guess I'm telling you this story today because I think that there's a part of all of us that's just like little me. Maybe we have stories of when we had separation anxiety when we were kids. And you know, even as adults, there's always that part of us that really just wishes we could absolutely know which bus, what's going to happen, where it's all going to work out. And so we would all love to have perfect faith. But as we know, in Judaism, we teach us all the time, perfect faith is not possible in this very imperfect world. So what is faith in Judaism? Judaism has a much more sophisticated understanding of faith. It's much deeper than just believing that something is going to work out and choosing to believe it. In fact, Judaism is the opposite of that. It is, instead of making ourselves believe something, it is in fact a radical embrace of not knowing what's going to happen. That's what faith is all about in Judaism. You know, Parshat Vayechi has an interesting way it begins. If you actually look in a Torah scroll, in the way it's written in the calligraphy, you see it starts right in the middle of the column without a break right in front of it. Now, most parshas in the Torah have a break in the calligraphy, so you know where the new parsha is going to begin. Not so with Vayechi. It just starts right in the middle. It's very hard to find the beginning of the parsha because it's just right there, hidden. And in fact, it has a name. There's a name for this kind of parsha. It's called Satum. It means closed. And Rashi explains that it's Satum for the same reason he explains why Jacob didn't share what was going to happen. That it's closed because this parsha is actually closed to us. Not only is it a closing parsha, but it will not reveal the end of days. It will not, even though he wants to legalot, he wants to reveal what's going to happen, it's a closed story, so he can't reveal it to us. Now, the Ishbitzer Rebbe has a very interesting teaching on this Satum, on this closed parsha. He's looking at the Rashi where he says he wanted to legalot, he wanted to reveal it, but he couldn't. And he actually drashes the Rashi, which is very interesting. He says, yes, he wanted to legalot, but if he revealed it, then he would have to reveal the galut, which is the wordplay. Galut means exile. He would have to reveal that we would go through century upon century of exile, century upon century of persecution. And yes, even though he would tell us that we'll have a happy ending and Mashiach will come and it'll be Olam Haba, that he would strike fear into the hearts of all generations of the Jewish people, and that wouldn't do. And so therefore, it's closed because it would defeat the purpose. Right? Because the purpose of our journey through history is that we're supposed to struggle in the world, even though that's a difficult truth. We're supposed to grow and learn, and we're supposed to teach the world something as a result of our learned experience through the centuries. Now, this is a very profound teaching when you think about it. It really sets Judaism apart from other faith traditions. You know, in other religions, they have a sacred text, and you must believe what the sacred text teaches you about what's going to happen. Often it's about what's going to happen after you die. So if you're being tested in this world, but then it tells you, it promises you in heaven, it's going to be a party nonstop. And there's a reason why that's not emphasized in Judaism. Now, of course, there are exceptions. There are places in Judaism where they try to teach this, but it's not the rule in Judaism. We don't teach what's going to happen. We don't. And the point is that it's not about knowing what's going to happen. It's about the embrace of not knowing. That's the point of the journey, the drama, the incredible story of what it means to be human. The Ishbitzer teaches something very interesting about this as well. He says, the one thing that sets human beings apart from all of the animals is that we have free will, is that we have this capacity to choose. And the fact, he says, that there are Jewish people who can choose to do a mitzvah, to do a sacred action, when we have no idea how it's all going to work out, he says that's the greatest miracle of all. Right? It's a beautiful teaching, and that's really a teaching about faith, isn't it? He's saying that faith in Judaism is not about making ourselves certain that it's all going to work out. It's about having no idea, but taking an action that affirms what is good and true. That in every moment we have a choice before us. We can choose either to affirm kindness, goodness, compassion, justice, holiness, or we can choose cynicism and abandonment and fear. That choice is always before us. And the greatest miracle happens even when we're not sure, even when God seems hidden, even when there is difficulty in life, or exile, or a pandemic in the world, the fact that we can still choose to do a sacred action without knowing, that is the essence of what it means to be the best of our humanity, right there and right then. And for this reason, when I reflect on this, I'm not entirely sure I agree with Rashi when he explains that God simply removed the gift of prophecy from Jacob when he first promised that he was going to tell them what was going to happen. Here's my interpretation. Here's my disagreement with none other than the great Rashi. I think that what happened at that moment is that the Yisrael within him, his higher self, got a hold of Jacob. Jacob was about to tell him what's going to happen, but then Yisrael, his own better angel, stepped in and said, you know what? Instead of telling you what's going to happen, I'm going to bless you. And in that, he's teaching a very beautiful message for all of us to take with us into this secular new year, right? That better than trying to know how it's all going to work out, we should live our lives as a blessing. We should seek out the possibilities of blessing in our lives. We should seek out how we can be a blessing. We can seek out how we can be a blessing to the whole world, moment by moment, choice by choice. So may we all receive Jacob's blessing to his offspring, which is really, truly his blessing to each and every one of us, even at this moment, all these thousands of years later. May we resolve never to run from life, never to turn to cynicism, but rather to find the strength and the courage within, always to choose life and light and blessing. Because in making that choice in every moment, even when we don't know, this is how we can transform the world and truly make this whole world a blessing for generations to come. Shabbat Shalom, everyone.